how can organizations be future ready, and why now?
Well, the why now question is big because we're on the cusp of some of the most major strategic changes that anybody's really seen. We're coming to the end of about 40 years of a consumerist economy that's been based around the baby boom. That is over. And while people sometimes talk about a recovery, that's probably that's not the right way to put it. It's going to shift to something else, and we're not sure what that's going to be. And you see we're at peak oil, most likely, where the supply and demand of oil are not going to match up in the way they have in the past. So, I mean, the first concept to get that leaders need to get with is that what you may have had success with in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s may certainly not be what leads you to success in the future, which is why you need to get ready for that future. And that's where I see intelligence coming in and playing a huge role.
Craig, when you think about being future ready, what do you think about?
We've gone through cycles, and we go through cycles in generations, we go through cycles in decades. Again, you can predict when the next recession is going to be pretty accurately within a couple of months or one another. And actually, if you look back over the last 5 to 7 decades worth of data, they come on a regular flow. So this so-called Great Recession, many of us, again, who'd studied those kinds of data would understand when it was coming. But what Eric said was right. I mean, that only works as long as you're always on the same curve. The minute you've shifted to a new curve, the world's going to be different. And it reminds me, I can't drive my car by looking out of the rear view mirror. So if all I'm doing is extrapolating, if all I'm doing is extending those trends, believing that the future is along the same curve when indeed we've shifted to a new curve, there's been a structural shift, not just a cyclical shift, it changes how we go about preparing organizations for the future.
It's been Coke versus Pepsi, Ford versus GM, that kind of mentality followed right along our sort of, post-World War II analytics. And so by the time we got to the 80s, it was really, you got different firms coming from different countries. You got Japanese car companies coming. That just blew everybody's mind. And I think that's where competitive intelligence really popped up in prevalence in the organization. And so we've been using that sort of post-World War II mindset of do we win, do they win, who wins the war, all these war metaphors. And now, in the same way that, the way we think about world peace and security has changed to this thing that, it doesn't really, matter what country something's happening in. You have to take a much more sophisticated look. And you can see that with terrorism and, asymmetrical warfare. Just worrying about a nation state doesn't cut it. And in competition in business, worrying about there's a big bad guy and he's the competitor. I'm going to get a bunch of information on that guy, and that's going to mean that I get to succeed in the world. That doesn't match up with the reality of you've got these mega trends, the social and technological and economic trends we were talking about before, but then you also get industry trends, and it just mixes up the whole notion of competition. And when I think of what's going on, let's say in telepresence and telecommunications, well, you've got Apple and Cisco, and you've got other software, Skype and software company, and these guys all have to work together in the same ecosystem, and they're competing for a pie. But Apple might use Cisco hardware in the back, but Cisco's doing telepresence, but Apple's got Apple TV. Wait a minute, who's competing with who? And when you talk about that kind of confusion, you have to get into a much more sophisticated sort of analysis when you move into the future, because just to go, well, either we'll win or they'll win, totally breaks down.
Well, it's very seldom that you'll see an existing known competitor have really real existential impact on a company's long-term ability to compete. It's really the driving forces in the external environment that ultimately make for an opportunity for a new type of competitor to emerge. And I think in terms of, look at what the business travel situation has had happen to it with the telepresence example. I mean, business travel never thought that they would be competing against telepresence by making business travel less relevant. It's not as relevant any longer to get together face to face in the same room when you can do it from across the country or around the world.
There's a lot of organizations and functions inside of these companies that deal with intelligence, that deal with that concept of being future ready. What can you talk about in terms of those organizations that are really getting into true analysis and
Well,
intelligence?
one of the most exciting trends that I've noticed among clients and beyond in the last 5 years or so is that really the emergence of the corporate library and information center as the hub around which a lot of the information collection and processing is done. The library and information center really feeds that analytic process. The intelligence process within the organization is really dependent in many ways on the existing infrastructures that the corporation has in place, and that often exists within the library. You have an extremely highly trained set of professionals there who've often got advanced degrees, who understand how to find answers to questions that many of the rest of us would struggle with. And there are tremendous opportunities, I think, out there for organizations like the Special Libraries Association, for example, really to enable their members to become more future ready and to power ultimately the analytic capability of the corporation.
Mm-hmm. And Craig, if you had one thing, key concept, key theme that you wanted to say to an organization like SLA, what would it be?
One of the most interesting things we found, the students that always do these best are the ones that interact early and often with their librarian. The librarians of the world can find things that, that 9/10 of us, 99 out of 100 of us, even, the so-called MBAs and best of the business students can't find. And it makes a huge difference because a lot of the kinds of analytical techniques that we need to apply to give us better answers, better insights, better intelligence to the kinds of problems that we face needs to be filled in with the kind of information that they can access far more easily, far more efficiently, far more cost effectively than we're going to be able to do either by trying to Google everything and try to figure out where it is, or by the old tried and true effort of I'm just going to copy somebody else's thing. Guess what? It's written in a different language. Now what do you do? The librarians can help you with that.
What would you say are the key concepts in this new book that, when you think about being future ready, really you would draw out?
Well, the future's changed a lot, and in the last few years. And 2008 was a real watershed when I saw the banks catch on fire. When you have this absurdly evident crisis about to happen that was foreseeable from 3 or 4 years. They're giving grad students $400,000 loans for houses. This isn't going to turn out well. They're creating complex financial instruments that a Jesuit accountant couldn't possibly decode with 3 years in a monastery. You're never, this was obviously going to happen. So when everything got caught on fire, I realized, wait a minute, for all we talk about, we think about the future, we don't. Most people don't. And most bureaucracies don't. And the fault is not the people. The fault is the bureaucracies and how they're structured. And you have to have a mindset, and as leaders of organizations, you have to be able to create a culture that accepts information about the future, that has honest, non-emotional discussions about the future, and those have to be woven into our organizations, and we have not been doing it. And this concept of future ready, I think it's very interesting that it's coming from librarians. They're not normally the superheroes in these tales, right? But the fact is, as we've been covering a lot of these points, there's so much information out there. It's not about collection anymore. It's about who can navigate you through that information. But moreover, who's got the right mindset for it? So I was tickled when the librarians are like, we're going to be the champions of the future. It's like, well, great, somebody's got to. And it's about mindset, and it's about getting enthusiasm for the idea of things are going to change. It's okay. It's nobody's fault. Now let's do it.
They're accustomed to helping their clients ask the right questions. And I think that's a huge part of analytic fitness, is the notion that we can ask questions all day long, but if those questions ultimately aren't relevant to interpreting the future, what difference does it make? Librarians are highly attuned and accustomed to assisting clients to ask the right questions in the first place. And that's really a huge part of being intelligence, having your intelligence apparatus be future ready as well.
That's one of the big challenges then for the librarians, right? They need to be able to make sure that their clients are able to ask the right questions. So part of that means they're going to have to be able to engage in those conversations. To engage in those conversations, they're going to have to understand what happens in the links of the chain once they hand it off. So once they can get the information, because the question always changes as you look at it. In order to answer those questions, again, it's going to morph. It's going to be different. It's going to change because the client changes while you're looking for it. The customers are changing. The environment's switching. The black swans all of a sudden swimming in the lake. Things like that always happen. And so again, we also need to be able to know how to change the question as we go. And the only way we can do that, again, is to be part of that process, not just at one point in the process, but to be involved in the process throughout.
We see a lot of our clients positioned at different spots in their organization. Product management, at the library level, at a strategic level. If you don't have the ear of the CEO or the ear of the executive management team or the board of directors or whoever is your champion for your program, you have to be able to be nimble and shift with those differing cultures, differing atmospheres, different attitudes when it comes to who you're serving as a stakeholder.
The techniques are out there in terms of collecting, good trend information. That stuff is actually the easy part. I can write you a 1,000-page report. That's the easy part. And it's got nothing on creating an environment where people go, wait a minute, it's not going to be like it was the last 30 years of our career. It's going to be most likely more different than any of us have ever seen. And we just need to get in the headspace about that. But this mindset thing can come from anywhere. And when you're talking about whether people, it doesn't matter what position in the company you are, as long as you've got the ear of the right people, as long as you are helping create that environment, then you're going to be future ready.